Hello everyone and good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar by Cambridge Chem. Today's session is about answering the question, how can adaptive baseline assessments build a solid foundation for pupils? My name is Lucy Baker and I'm an assessment advisor at Chem, and I have previously worked as a primary school teacher in Cambridgeshire. Before we start, I have got a few housekeeping rules. So, firstly, you may have noticed your microphones are muted and you cannot hear any members of the audience. You are all muted in order to optimise the sound quality. If you would like to ask any questions or have any general comments, please post them in the questions box on the right-hand side and we'll answer any questions in the webinar or at the end. If you're having any technical difficulties, please put a comment in the question box and we'll do our best to try and resolve them for you. This webinar is being recorded, so please do not worry if you miss anything, as you'll be able to watch it later. If any of your questions do not get answered, we will produce a document and send it around along with the slides and recordings later. You will receive a certificate of attendance today, which will be sent to your inbox 1 hour after this webinar is finished. You will also receive a copy of the webinar recording and the slides next week. I really hope you enjoy this session, and now I'm going to hand you over to David Martin, our presenter. He is our onboarding and training manager here at Chem. He has lots of experience of talking to schools and teachers all about Chem assessments and the data.
Thank you, Lucy. Hello, everybody. Nice to talk to you today. So we're going to concentrate on BASE and InCAS during this webinar, but it's just really this first slide here just gives you an idea as to where the kind of assessments that we offer here at Chem, the age ranges that we actually have products available for. So we go right from early years, which has an aspects assessment, nursery age for children between 3 and 4. We have BASE, which is the reception age assessment for children between 4 and 5. We then move into the later primary years, which is InCAS for students between 5 and 11 years old. We then go into the pre-16 assessments, MIGIS and YELIS. MIGIS for students between 11 and 14, cohort 7 to 9 over here in the UK. Into YELIS, which is the 14 to 16 age range, cohorts 10 and 11. And finally, we have our post-16 ALICE assessment, which is for students between 16 and 18. So the key bit of information that we're going to talk about in the next sort of half hour or so is these are baseline assessments designed to collect information, give you information about where the student is at that particular moment in time. And one of the key features of Chem baseline assessments is they are adaptive. Okay, so what we mean by that is the assessment will be able to react to the answers that the student will give. So when we get to later age ranges, the way that the assessments adapt becomes a little bit more sophisticated. We've got lots of algorithms that are working in the background. The algorithms are choosing the most appropriate difficulty question to present the student with. Okay, so we will talk a little bit more about that as we progress through the webinar. But the first thing is just to really talk a little bit about the baseline tests. So they are formative assessments, all about providing you as the teachers, your school, with information about your students, where they might be stronger, where they might need that bit of additional support. That really is the aim of a baseline test. It is going to give you the ability of your students at this particular moment in their learning. It's also going to allow you to measure the impact that you're actually having on your students as they progress through school. Doing one of these baseline tests, it could potentially highlight an area where a student is actually struggling. They need that little bit of additional support. You will no doubt be putting something in place to try and address those issues, and you'll be able to measure the impact that the intervention has possibly had on your student, on either an individual, or if it's a group of students who are having a similar, you have identified a similar weakness for, then maybe you can have a look and see the impact it's had on a group of students. So BASE and InCAS are the two assessments that we're going to talk about in this webinar here. So they are computer delivered assessments. They are adaptive. We'll talk more about how they adapt in a few minutes. And it's all really about providing you with reports that are going to highlight the ability of the students who have actually taken the assessment itself. So these are low stakes tests. The results are not going to follow you through the rest of your life. And there's no pass or fail. The purpose of the test is to give you as teachers information about your students. So BASE itself, it is the assessment that we have for ages 4 to 5, reception age over here in the UK. The assessment is teacher-led. It is carried out one-on-one with the pupils. There is sound. So the test itself will be doing all of the talking. It will be asking questions. The teacher will just be responding to the answer that the student will either give, and the student could just be pointing at where they think the answer is, if that's what they're being asked to do. They could be repeating the words. The teacher is just marking on screen whether the pupil has actually given them a right answer or a wrong answer. BASE is a fun, engaging, story-based assessment. We do have a story running through the test itself, so hopefully that will keep everybody engaged while they're doing the test. We do have a start of year and an end of year test available with BASE. It will give you, so when the start of year is taken, it will give you a measure of ability for the student at that particular point in time. When they do the end of year test, we will then be able to measure the progress that is being made between those two testing points. Now, the end of year test is dependent on whichever BASE package you might choose. There are 3 packages available. The end of year test is available from 2 of those packages. Included within BASE, we've got literacy, we have numeracy, we've got some letter recognition, there's some reading in there, counting, number recognition, shape recognition. There is an optional personal, social and emotional development section, as well as a communication measure as well. And phonological awareness is also included. We're talking here mainly about listening, repeating words and so on. 15 to 20 minutes on average, that's how long the test will actually take. Depending on how the student is actually doing, could go on for a little bit longer than that, but on average it's going to be between 15 and 20 minutes for each of those. Important thing, the test can be stopped at any time. Okay, so for children of this age, we know that even though 15 to 20 minutes is not a huge amount of time, it might just be a little bit too long for some students. So if a student does have to leave halfway through the test, it's not the end of the world, because the test can be stopped and then restarted later on the same day or the next day. And the test itself will be aware that a partial test exists for the student, and it gives you as the teachers the option to either pick up from where you were up to before the test had to be stopped, or to start from the beginning again. I think it all really depends on how far through you are. If you'd only got 2 or 3 minutes into the test before the pupil had to leave, then you would probably just start from the beginning again, but it does give you the option. That's what you would decide as to whether to start it again or pick it up from where you were up to. I thought we would talk quickly here. We've talked about adaptive testing, what we mean by that, but I think it would be really good to have a little look at that. So with BASE, with this being a reception age assessments, the children are very young. So we do have a stopping rule in place for BASE. The stopping rule itself is triggered if we get 3 questions in a row wrong, or if we get between 3 and 4 in the section wrong. The test will stop asking questions in that particular area and move on to the next one. So as we've said, in adaptive tests, those questions are going to get more difficult as we go through. The more correct answers we give, the more difficult questions we're actually going to see. So if we imagine this is our number recognition section within BASE itself. So we see a number on the board here, and we're asking the question, can you tell me what that number is? So if the pupil can, so if they're getting a few right, we will see that these questions are going to increase in difficulty. So a single digit could become double digits. If we're still doing well, we're still getting questions right, then potentially the student could reach four numbers here. So one single digit becomes double digits then become 3. And if we're still doing well, we could potentially see a number recognition question like the one we're looking at there. Similar things in the counting section. So we see a ladybird. There's so many spots on the ladybird's back here. So the question is going to be, how many spots can you see on the ladybird's back here? Now, this is an interesting area of questions. We're trying to determine here whether the pupil is actually subitizing. Now, if you've ever heard of subitizing, if you think a prime example of subitizing is if you think of a dice. Whenever you roll a dice, a traditional 6-sided dice, whenever you roll a dice, whatever it lands on, we never count. You know, we just know by looking at it that it's landed on 4, that it's landed on 6. So that's what we're trying to find out with these questions here. We're trying to determine whether the pupil can actually count or whether they have just looked at that and they know that there's 4 on the back there. So we will increase in difficulty the questions that we see in this section to try and determine whether there's any subitizing going on or whether the student can genuinely count. So we could see 4 spots to begin with. If we're doing all right, we would get to this one here. Now we can't subitize that. We can't just look at that and go, there's 8. You know, you've got to now be able to count. And the kind of difficulty these counting questions can get to is something like this one here. Now you definitely can't subitize that. If you've reached this far, then the student can definitely count. In those questions, that's by no means the most difficult question that you could see in this section. There are more difficult questions within as well. But some students might not get anywhere near these questions, but some will. Potentially some could even in the start of your test itself. Okay, so just an idea there is to, when we mean an adaptive test, that's the kind of thing we're actually talking about. Those questions will start off at a reasonably low level, but if we're doing well, if we're getting questions right, then they will increase in difficulty. And as we mentioned earlier, the assessment, it can be stopped at any point, and the teacher would then be given the option when they restart the test to either go back to the beginning or to pick up from the beginning of the section we were up to before we had to stop the test. Okay, so once the base tests have been taken, you get reports from Chem. The reports are going to detail how the students, either individual students or how the group of students have actually scored within those tests. So we have a question level report to begin with. Gives us a detailed account of all of the questions that a student could have seen within BASE and whether they got them right or wrong. I've got an example of that report coming up. We've got a table of standardized scores. So a really good way of comparing your own reception age children against others who've taken the same test. We get an individual pupil report. So an example of those is on the left-hand side of our screen here. So we get an indication of how the student performed in the test alongside some descriptive text as well. We've got a class report. It's not just all about looking at an individual student's result, being able to have a look at the class performance as well. We have a parent report and interactive reports as well. So again, the reports that you get will be dependent on whichever package you have actually opted for. We have an example here of the question level report. So this was in the number recognition section. Okay, so along the row where we see number score, in that row, those are the numbers that the students were asked whether they could actually recognize. So we can see there, all of our student names will be down the left-hand side because each row will be an individual student. So you will see the names of those students in the Excel file. We see how many numbers questions the student actually got right. So my first student correctly identified 9, my second student 11, and so on. And we can see when we go across here the numbers that the students were, the numbers that the students were able to recognize. And we can actually see the stopping rule triggered as well when we look here. If we look in our first row, we can see that for the single digit, we were fine. Student was doing okay, but when we started getting to double digits, the students started to struggle. They got 3 in a row wrong, and they didn't see any more questions. So there's the stopping rule for this particular student, triggered by those 3 in a row incorrect answers. So this student would have left the number recognition section and moved on to the next. But that's a really good report, especially for classroom teachers. You know, if you are lesson planning, if you're the teacher of this small group of pupils, your lesson planning, you're thinking about numbers, this is going to give you an idea as to where you maybe need to start. You know, it looks as if everybody's reasonably okay with single digit numbers. Yeah, we have a couple of students who got a couple of those wrong, but certainly when we get to double digits, that's where it seems to be everybody's reaching, you know, the upper levels of their ability at this particular point. So if I was lesson planning, then that's going to help me plan my next lesson, or the next lesson where we're going to talk about numbers. So really, really valuable report for the classroom teacher. Moving on to the pupil report here. So again, just a little example of exactly where we are. So we have our literacy and our maths questions. We can see this actually is showing start of year against end of year. So this school have opted for one of the packages that includes start of year and end of year testing. So we can see how the student performed in the start of year test. That's on the left-hand side of the arrow, the blue line. That's the student, where the student was in the start of year. Where they are in the end of year is on the right-hand side of the arrow. So we can see the difference in score, the progress that is being made between those 2 testing points. And we've got some descriptive text that appears alongside the arrow as well. So that's going to give us, it's going to bring the result to life a little bit. Okay, so it's not just the number, it's going to give you a little bit of supporting text to go alongside those numbers as well. And looking at the class report, so again, we've got start of year on the left-hand side, end of year on the right-hand side. Every one of those dots represents an individual student. We've got the descriptive text alongside the arrows as well. And looking at that, we can see the difference in the scores achieved, in the performance of those students when they did the start of year, and then the end of year, which becomes available on the 1st of May the following year. We can look at the scores that have been achieved in that end of year assessment, and that's going to allow us to look at the progress between those two testing points that's been made by this particular group of students. So that's base. Reception aids, children between 4 and 5 years old. We then get to the next assessment that I was going to talk to you about in this webinar, and that's the InCAS assessment. So InCAS stands for Interactive Computerized Assessment System. So that's what InCAS actually means. We do, just to flag this up, just so that everybody's aware of this, we do have a new Cambridge Chem primary product coming. It's going to be launched sometime in 2023. I'm thinking probably around about August time. It's going to be very similar to InCAS with some improvements that have been made. So it's still very much worthwhile listening to what we're going to talk about for the next 10 minutes or so, because this new product is going to be very similar to InCAS, but there will be, excuse me, there will be some improvements that have been made, some additions to the actual feedback and so on. Just excuse me there while I get my voice back. Okay, so InCAS is for children between 5 and 11 years old. It is a modular suite of assessments. We do have 6 modules in total. We've got a reading, we've got a maths, and a developed ability modules. So the reading module includes recognizing words, decoding comprehension. The maths, the modules are broken down into question areas. So the maths includes number 1, number 2 questions, MSS, which stands for measure, shape, and space, data handling, developed ability, we've got picture vocab, we've got non-verbal ability in there. The numbers that you see at the end of each one of those rows is the maximum running time that the module will last. So the reading module will last a maximum of 25 minutes. On average, you're probably looking at between 20 and 25 minutes. When the time is up, when the allowed time is up, the module will stop, regardless of whether you have seen every possible question. Chances are you won't have, but that actually is on purpose. The module timings are meant, the modules themselves are designed to time out before the average student would see all possible questions. InCAS also includes, we've got a spelling module, and we have a mental arithmetic module, and then we've got an attitudes module as well. Attitudes is looking for attitudes to reading, attitudes to maths, attitudes to school. So these are curriculum free. They're not tied to any particular curriculum. It doesn't make any difference to us when schools choose to actually administer the modules, but they are designed to only be taken once in the academic year. I always think the sooner the modules are taken by the students, the sooner schools have access to the data, the more you can then use it for. The students themselves are in control of the modules, so they will be sat there, there is sound, so they will be sat there with a set of headphones on. They get example questions at the start of all of the modules, so they know how to answer the real questions when they start. But certainly the students will be doing these on their own. Teachers will just be in the room to make sure that everybody's okay, nobody's having any technical problems or anything like that, but certainly the students themselves are running the modules. So we're talking about adaptive assessments again. All of the questions within InCAS have been assigned as an age-related difficulty. Okay, and we work out the age-related difficulty of a question by looking at the age. During the trialing of all of these questions, a suitable age equivalence was assigned to a question where a student of that particular age has a 50-50 chance of actually giving us a correct answer to the question. So what that does is give students the opportunity to be presented with questions when they're taking the modules that we would not expect them to know the answers to because of their age. You know, you might be 9 years old when you're taking the general maths InCAS module, but you could be presented with questions that we would expect older students were more likely to know the answers to. And the reason why you will be seeing those questions is because you have been doing well. You've been getting questions right. Those questions have increased in difficulty as we have moved through the module. And, you know, as long as we're getting questions right, then we're going to see questions that we wouldn't necessarily expect the student to know the answers to. So it really does give them the opportunity to just show you exactly what they're actually capable of. So a few examples here, just to sort of give a bit of a feel for what these modules look like. So we look at the reading module here. We've got word recognition questions to begin with. So remember, we're sat there with our set of headphones on. We will hear a word, and then we will see 5 possible matches to the word that we've just heard. We need to choose which one we think is the right one. The decoding. So this time, again, we're going to hear a word, but this time it might not be a real word. It will certainly be a word that we're not overly familiar with. But again, we hear a word, it's not one that we recognize, we might not have heard it before, but do we know what that word would look like if it was written down? And then comprehension, passage. Depending on how we've been doing in the recognizing words and the decoding, that's going to determine the difficulty of the comprehension passage that we will see. So we can see in that example texts, we can see here at various points within the paragraph, we've got 3 possible words. One of those words is the correct word in the context of the sentence, where we just choose which one we think is the right one. So the general maths, we know that we have 4 categories of questions here. So we see an example here. This is a reasonably easy number 1 question. We can see 3 bikes. We've got 4 possible answers. We just choose which one we think is the right answer to the question. Slightly more difficult data handling question on screen here. So we have the figure, a series of charts there, and we've got the question, we've got a number. Which number is in the square and the circle, but not the triangle? We've just got to work out which one of those numbers we think is the correct one. And then the developed ability module includes picture vocabulary. So we hear the word and then we see 5 possible matches to the word that we've just heard. And we've got non-verbal ability in there as well. So these are problems of position. So we see a pattern on the left-hand side. All of those circles will be white to begin with. We click on them to turn them blue. Then we have to find the left-hand pattern in the right-hand area here. So it will not have been reflected, rotated, or anything like that. It will be in a different place, but it will look the same. We just have to work out where it is. So this is a difficult one, but it's really interesting watching the students do this. You know, some will refuse to admit that they can't find it, so they really concentrate, might have a few false starts before you actually realize where the shape is. And that's where it is for this particular question here. The report that is available from InCAS, and we would be able to provide the age the student is actually working at. So what was the average age-related difficulty of the questions they were capable of answering, and how does that differ from their actual age when they sat down to take the module? We've got attainment profiles, which will let us have a look at the consistency of the scores. Do we have statistically significant results? Was there any question areas that a student particularly struggled with? Was there any guessing going on? You might have noticed when we were looking at those examples there, we are looking at mainly multiple choice. You know, there's only really the spelling aspect, the spelling module, where you don't have multiple choice. So being able to get a measure of whether there was any guessing going on would be really useful. We get standardized scores from these modules, again comparing your students against others who've taken the same modules. We've got cohort profile reports for those who maybe want to look at the group or want to look at the cohort or the school picture in a particular module. And then we've got a progress measure available that will link together, because InCAS is only taken once in an academic year. You might have a student or a group of students who took the same module in a previous academic year. It will be really useful to be able to look at how their current score compares to maybe last year's score as well. So there is a report that will allow you to do that. So a couple of examples here. It's our simple age equivalence table, where we've got the age of our students in this particular column here, in their achieved age equivalences, just showing the reading and general maths in this example. But it's available, this same report is available for all of the modules. One key feature of InCAS is the breakdown of the modules as well. We know that the modules are made up of component parts. So rather than just show the top level, in order to see the complete picture of how the students progress through the module, we can give a breakdown. So this is looking at the reading module that includes recognizing words, decoding, comprehension, as we saw earlier. We also put the spelling module result here as well. And we can look at that and see, is there one particular section that a student struggled with? Is there one section they did really well? And, you know, looking at that first student there, it was the words decoding where they were stronger. We look at our second pupil and we've got a definite weaker performance in the spelling module and quite a strong performance in the comprehension module there. So, you know, given that complete picture, make sure that you're not missing anything when you're looking at the results. It's not going to hide the weakness in a particular component part of the module by an overall good module result. We have the scores chart as well. Now this is going to give us the visual profile of how the student actually performed in the module. It's going to let me see whether there's a weakness, and it's going to give me an idea as to whether there was any guessing going on. So looking at that, we need to know two things really to make the most of the chart that we can see here. We need to know what that green line is. So the green line is the age at the time of testing. We can see down the y-axis, that is our age equivalence line. So the green line indicates the actual chronological age of the student when they took the module. The blue square is the achieved age equivalence. So knowing those two things, we can look at that and identify where the student performed the strongest and where they didn't do as well. Okay, just looking at that now, we can see data handling was that kind of question area where this particular student struggled the most. But the lines themselves are also going to give us some useful information as well. It's going to tell us how consistent the student was when they were going through the module. More importantly, it's going to give us an idea as to whether there might have been a bit of guessing going on. The wider the confidence, the more likely that there was guessing going on. During the module itself, if those lines are quite narrow, then it just indicates the more consistent answers the student was actually providing. So, you know, it's a good way of just looking at how the students performed and how they reacted to the questions throughout the module itself. And we can also flag whether we have significant results, just looking at whether we have space between either the upper or lower confidence line and that green line. It's going to indicate the significance of a result. Taking a step back and maybe looking at the group performance, we can do charts like the one we can see here. So every one of those box and whisker plots that we can see is a year group for this example school. Every dot indicates an individual student. We can show their names if we wanted to. So all of these dots indicate students, and we can also look at maybe the range of abilities that we have within that particular class or cohort. You know, we might have some students who have achieved a really high age equivalence and some where we have quite a low age equivalence. If we think about the differentiation that a teacher would have to employ if they were teaching a group with a wide range of abilities, that's going to give us an idea of what that ability range might be in that particular year group or in that particular class. And then the final bit of feedback that I was going to quickly talk about here is the progress charts. So we can link together. So we can look at the most recent module result for a student, this example here. If we know that the student has taken the same module in previous academic years, then we can look at how they scored in those previous academic years as well. So there's a student who has been making consistently good progress ever since the first year that they were using, that their school was actually using InCAS. It gets really interesting if we have a situation like the one we can see here. So this could be the maths module results there. We've had a student who's been doing really well in the 4 previous years that the school have been using InCAS, but for whatever reason, their most recent maths result has actually dipped below that green line. So the green line represents where you would be if you were answering questions that we think you would be able to for your age. Above that, you were answering questions that we wouldn't necessarily expect you to be able to. Below that, the student was not capable of answering questions that we think they would be able to for their age. Okay, so this data really is all about starting conversations within schools, presenting with the results and then having a look at the results and, discussing what we think might be happening within or with a particular student in this case. Okay, so that's as far as I was going to go. I'm not sure whether we have any questions. See if anybody wants to jump on the line with any questions.
Thanks so much, David. That was really interesting. Lots of information that reports there. We actually had a few questions come in. So I'm going to start with the first one for you. It was, how easy is InCAS to use in the classroom? So how easily can they use the InCAS assessment in the classroom?
That's a really good question. The InCAS assessments themselves, I'm going to assume that we're talking about setting them up. It's a very, very simple process to actually set up these tests. Even if you, I often think that's very, very easy for me to say because I've been a chem a long time and I have set up a lot of these tests, but it is really, there are requirements that you need to do, uploading a list of your students, and that actually generates the individual module passwords that the students need. When they launch the test, it will ask them for a module password. So the students themselves would have 6 individual module passwords, but we have things in place that will help you manage that. You can print out PDFs with all of the reading module passwords at one time and just make sure that the student has access to the password. Setting up the test itself, it is just a single link. The link itself will work for all students you intend testing InCAS with. It doesn't matter if you have different year groups, year 2, 4, and 6 maybe. There won't be a different assessment link. It's the same one. It's the unique module password that is unique to the individual student. So it's one of those things that is actually going to get a little bit easier with the new product. That's, you know, one of the things that I'm actually hearing about the new primary product is that it is going to make administration of these tests even easier than it is at the moment, because I honestly don't think it's that complicated at the moment, but it does require a few steps to be taken before you can actually do them. But we have filters and everything in place to try and help with the management of the actual process itself. But I do think that is something that we are going to see an improvement on towards the back end of this year when the new product is available.
Perfect. Thank you for that, David. A few more questions have actually come in. So the first one is there a way to assess without a computer? And I think we could both, there isn't a way to assess without a computer.
Yeah,
it's all online based.
But you don't have to use the fully online version. There is an offline version of the test itself. But yeah, the one thing that you do need is a computer, unfortunately.
The next one are how are the reports to the parents?
Right. So with BASE, you do get that parent report. We don't have a parent report available for InCAS yet, but the BASE parent report, it will detail a little bit about chem. It has a little bit about what the test was. So for BASE, it'll give like a little bit of an idea as to what BASE is. You know, it's a single assessment. It's looking at literacy. It's looking at numeracy. There will be a little bit of information about how their particular son or daughter did in the test itself. There will be a little bit of next steps advice in there as well, but it will not be as detailed as any report that, you know, I'm sure the schools themselves would actually be able to generate for their students, because you have a huge advantage over us. We only have how the student performed in this test to go on, whereas you have all of the other knowledge. You know, you actually know these students, so you're always going to know a lot more about them than we do, just based on how the pupil performed in the test itself. But it's always the school's choice as to whether they would share those parent reports. I think you've got to look at them yourself and, you know, make up your own mind whether it's something that you would want to share with the parents. It's always good that it's there, so that if anybody does ask about, you know, what this test was actually all about, if the pupil goes home and just sort of, you know, casually mentions it, that they sort of took a little test, it might be that the parents will be quite interested to know what it was all about. So it will give them some, probably as much information as we think they would want to know about the test itself. A little bit about us, a little bit about what the test was, and then how their child performed.
Fabulous. Just to add to that, I would say that our reports are quite visual as well. So with links to parents, you can use the reports in parents' evenings just to show parents if they want quite a visual representation of their child's development, which might support them as well and make them quite positive towards you. So the next one is linked to the parent's role as well. So I've got, what is the parent's role after the start of year baseline assessment is completed?
Right, okay. Interesting question, because I suppose when you're looking at the results from that start of year test, you know, teachers are going to be looking at it. It's going to give them an idea as to, you know, whether they would like to encourage, you know, whenever they're talking to parents, whether they want to encourage parents to start and read with their children when they're at home, if they don't already do that. So yeah, you know, there's probably all sorts of little snippets of advice that that teachers can then give parents when they're looking at maybe how the children have scored in these tests. Because if we do have students who are coming from homes where, you know, parents regularly sit down and sort of read with their children, then I think you would probably see the benefits of that. When the start of year test, you know, it's a big thing at the moment. Lots of things in the news at the moment about that early years development and how important these things are, you know, to sort of improve children's learning at this very, very young age as well. So, you know, I think the thing from like me is, we know that these are low stakes tests. We know that these children are very, very young. We know that at this age, they are almost like a sponge, you know, absorbing information all the time. If a pupil is off school for a week, you know, they come back a week later, they're going to have missed a lot in a week, you know, because at this age, we're picking things up virtually every day. So yeah, I think it's anything that can help teachers and even help involve the parents a little bit more, you know, suggesting little things that parents could do with their children at home every now and then, you know, have half hours reading, or trying to, you know, incorporate some little sort of some problems in there, or anything like that. I don't really think anything that parents would like to start and maybe do. I think it can only really be good and only benefit the children.
I would agree with that too. As an ex-primary school teacher, I think this would be very helpful to me to back up and support what I'm saying to the parent about why it's good to be reading at home, or why it's good to be practicing maths with household objects. So I think it's a really good way to do this. Yeah. It's a good opener for conversations.
Well. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Hopefully be fun as well, you know.
And I've just got one more question, and then that's all our questions. Mm-hmm. It says, what if we want to have tests twice a year to measure the progress for primary years?
Okay, so that's a really good question. At the moment, we can't do that with InCAS, because InCAS is the one for 5 to 11 age ranges that is only meant to be taken once in the academic year. But we saw the progress report that you can get from it, the one that we're looking at. You know, I think I'm still sharing my screen, so you can probably still see the report here, where we can look at the progress, just not within the same academic year. So that's not to say that all schools will use InCAS every year, because they don't. You know, some might test in year 2, year 4, and year 6. You know, but even if you were using InCAS like that, you would still get this progress measured between those 3 testing points. Probably the one where progress is part of the that progress can be measured within the academic year is going back to base, where we have that start of year and the end of year. So, remember that start of year test is going to give us a measure of ability right at the beginning of the academic year, because those start of year tests are available from about the 1st of August. The end of year then is available from the 1st of May. From the 1st of May of the following year. And that is going to allow us to look, well, the student was here when they did the actual start of year. They've had all these months of schooling in between the end of year becoming available in the 1st of May. And then once we see that, then we can see, before our eyes almost, the progress that has been made between those two tests and points. Just quickly going back, just to highlight that while we're talking about the progress here. We just look at this little example chart that we can see here. Using base here, we do have that start of year score on the left-hand side. If we show the text here, if we just look at literacy, we can see start of year, the pupil was matching simple shape and letter patterns. They could recognize about half of all letters and so on. When they did the end of year test, 6-7 months later, they had actually improved. So they were now reading selection of complex words and beginning to understand simple sentences. So, we can see the progress that has been made between those two tests and points. And that's one of the benefits of having the start of year and the end of year as one of the options. It is dependent on the base package you actually choose, but certainly if the progress measure is something that you're really keen on, then as long as you make sure that you opt for the package that includes that, you will be able to look at that, get that measure for where the student was at the start of year, all the months in between where we know they're going to be making progress. They do the same test at the end of the year. Chances are they will now know the answers to some of the questions that they didn't know the answers to when they did start of year. They will probably get that bit further. If you think back to some of those difficult questions that that I showed you earlier in the presentation, when we had like the counting, where we might not have gotten anywhere near that quite difficult ladybird question, where we had about 16 or 17 ladybirds. We maybe didn't get anywhere near that at the start of year, but by the time we do the end of year, we could get to that point and even beyond that point as well. So yeah, base at the moment is the assessment where we do have that progress measure available in the same academic year.
Thanks so much for that, David. So there was a few more questions, but we have run out of time. So what I will say is we will send answer the questions when they're sent out with the slideshow, just to make things a bit quicker. But what I'd like to say is another big thank you to David for taking the time to present today, and I hope you all really enjoyed it and it really helped you understand our products. We at Chem thank you all very much for attending, and if you have any more questions or would like to chat to a member of our Chem team, please email chem@cambridge.org and we can update you or give you some more information. But if you would also like to be updated, you join our mailing list. This is linked to the email you'll receive, and you could join up to get notifications of other webinars and other products that we have. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you again, and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.